Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy. As disappointing as Andrew Luck's sudden retirement is, we got to talk about the disappointment that is Team USA basketball right now. So they suffered their first international loss in 78 games. This is a streak that dates back all the way to 2006. Basically, they had a 10-point lead going into the second half against Australia, and they blew it. Out of nowhere, Patty Mills decided to just stick it to his current coach, and somehow the team, the only team composed of all NBA players, lost. Now, granted, it's not the real tournament. The real tournament's going to be starting up here in the next week. But what do we think of this team right now?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting in that you have quite a bit of young players, a lot more. And when I say young, I mean like really inexperienced, not battle-tested players. So if you look at the last World Cup, they had DeMarcus Cousins, Steph Curry, Anthony Davis, DeMar DeRozan, Andre Drummond, Kenneth Faried, Rudy Gay, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Mason Plumlee, Derrick Rose, Klay Thompson. Like that is legit, 5 all-stars starting, and then you even have an all-star or two coming off the bench, right? Mm-hmm. This year's team, you have Kemba Walker, okay, granted all-star, but even people have talked about, well, he's kind of a tier even below a Kyrie Irving, a lot of people have said. I don't know how you feel about that being a Boston fan. But you have Donovan Mitchell, who's very good rookie year, took a little bit of a step backwards last year. Miles Turner, Jason Tatum, Harrison Barnes, Chris Middleton, Jaylen Brown, Joe Harris, Mason Plumlee, Marcus Smart, Derek White, and Brooke Lopez, all of whom, are good NBA players, right? None of them obviously are very bad. But the only one that really pops out to me is a Kemba Walker as an all-star. I think Jason Tatum is very good for young players. So is Chris Middleton. We already mentioned Donovan Mitchell, but none of them are the all-stars that we've had in the past.
Well, this team definitely lacks a little bit of chemistry right now. They really only came together here in the last week. They've seen so many players in and out of the locker room with all the withdrawals too. Like we lost De'Aaron Fox in the last couple weeks. We lost Kyle Lowry. Kyle Kuzma pulled out with an ankle injury. So this team has lost a lot of their flexibility in their roster right now, especially at the guard position. So it's going to be interesting to see how they make it work, especially when they come against some of the better teams in this tournament. So like Jokic right now, he's out there for Serbia. He's going to be beast. I hear that the Serbian team is actually going to be probably like one of the biggest competition in this tournament. And then Greek Freak's out there for Greece, and it's amazing to hear the pride that this guy takes in this tournament. Granted, he's going to be surrounded by a lot of nobodies, but we've seen in basketball, one player could really swing a whole thing, and none of the players on the USA roster were able to stop him throughout the entire season. So it's going to be interesting to see if that matchup comes to fruition.
Yeah, and the other thing is for so many of these countries, to them, this is their big moment, right? So for us, it's the NBA Finals, and that's sort of what everybody's pushing towards. For them, a lot of times, I'm sure they have their own, whether it's country or regional, right, like across Europe or whatever it is. But for them, the world is a huge thing. And, they're sending their best players that they can. They're trying to win it, and so is USA basketball. But I think what happens a lot of times is, especially this year, is the NBA a lot of people, I think, are a little bit exhausted from last season and the way that it ended. And so you also ended the season seeing Boogie Cousins go down. You saw Kevin Durant go down. You saw Klay Thompson go down. So I think some players are erring on the side of caution, saying, hey, I don't want to risk possibly injuring myself playing in the summertime. But two, the NBA is so wide open this year. I think a lot more players are saying, forget about the world championships. Like, I'm trying to win an NBA championship with my team. And this year is my best chance to do it before Golden State gets back to full health, before the Nets are back to full health. And so I think there's a lot of dynamics that other countries don't necessarily have that we have. And that might be part of the reason why we're putting out such a weak team this year.
Well, it's funny because the way we always have heard about the American stereotypes like America, all this, we take everything too seriously. We like to prove our dominance other nations. And then when it comes to this tournament, you mentioned the pride that some of these other nations take in how they're going to perform in this tournament, and how it just doesn't feel like our team is taking it seriously. They do say, and one phrase that I've always liked is complacency is the killer of giants. And this team, I don't feel like they're giants is the big thing. You know, I know technically, again, this is the only roster that every single player on the roster is an NBA player. Technically, analytically, they are 66 wins above replacement compared to the rest of the tournament. And you compare that to even like the 92 Dream Team that everyone always talks about, which is ranked at a 94 wins above replacement. So it's interesting when you hear that, you know, that's still a huge positive, a huge plus in that category. But this, like you mentioned, we only really have Kemba Walker, who's a third team all NBA, and then a bunch of guys who have potential. And it's so disappointing when you look at players that should have been on this roster. Like De'Aaron Fox, he's a young guy. I feel like he has no excuse to have been dropping from this roster. Kyle Kuzma, if he's legitimately hurt with the ankle, sure. Okay, I could buy that a little bit. But we're going to talk about this guy a little later, too. I feel like there's no excuse for a Devin Booker to not be on this roster. Or, gosh, name another player, American, that's young, that's not on necessarily a playoff team. I think we should have been seeing more turnout. I understand if LeBron doesn't want to play. That's one thing, you know. I understand if James Harden doesn't want to. He's won a gold medal. But to see these guys who haven't really proved anything either in the NBA or proved anything even in going back to college in the NCAA tournament, you know, show a little pride or a little work ethic. You can't necessarily play with the idea, oh, what if I get hurt? Because you could get hurt at any moment. You get hurt getting out of bed in the morning. We've seen so many stupid injuries over the course of professional sports. You realize in the MLB, a guy went on the DL for trying to iron a shirt while he was wearing the shirt? Stuff happens.
Oh, I believe it. One of the funniest ones that I had heard, so like I said earlier, I have back injuries, right, and back problems. And so I was at the chiropractor one time. Chiropractor told me there was one guy that he was not able to, to adjust because his back was so messed up. And it was from turning, to get toilet paper while he was on the toilet. And whatever he did, it just messed up the discs in his back and jacked them all up. And it was so bad to the point where a chiropractor was like, hey, like I legally cannot work on you, right? Like you have too many back issues for me to be able to work on. So I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's not like NBA is the NFL. We talk about all the problems that the NFL has. Mm-hmm. Guys aren't like beating each other up, beating each other to death out there, like sure you can twist wrong and tear something, but again, you could do that just going down the stairs.
Yeah, and like I said, I think right now it might be because there was some really big injuries that were suffered in the past few months, right? Especially when all eyes were on the NBA. So you're looking at, that Toronto Golden State final, and you see Klay Thompson come down and his knee, shift wrong. And you could right away tell, like, something's torn right there. And then you see Kevin Durant, and you could see the point where his Achilles pops and it wiggles. And so I think right now some of the young players or players just around the league in general might still have that sort of trauma, I guess, in their mind of like, hey, I saw that Achilles snap. That's gross. I don't want that happening. And so I think they implicitly know like, hey, the risk of injuries are low in basketball. But at the same time, I think it was so recent that for them, it's probably still fresh in their mind. And so they're like, hey, I don't want to risk that.
Okay. Well, if this team loses, who do you see them losing to at this tournament?
So
let's rephrase that. What's a realistic expectation for this team? Do you think that they're the favorites for the gold medal still, or do you think this team could legitimately lose?
I think both, right? So I think they're a slight favorite for the gold medal still. Like you said, they still have all NBA level players, right? And granted, these other teams have some really good players, right? There's Jokic is out there, and you mentioned the Greek Freak is out there. So granted, yeah, there's some really good players that are still out there on these other teams, but there's definitely nobody with this level of talent. And so I would still expect them to bring home a gold medal, but it's not unrealistic to say that maybe they lose in the semis.
Yeah, that's a big one. If the league MVP is playing because he loves his country that much, then De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley, you have no reason to not be in this tournament.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree.
All right. So you have anything left on this, or do you think we should go into this week's headlines?
One last thing when it comes to USA basketball that I will say is at least from what I remember, this was like the third or fourth rotation that Pop was sort of doing as far as like who the starters are and who the closers are and all that. And so I think Pop was experimenting with, who fits well with who, who should I have on the courts playing next up to some of these other guys. Whereas Australia was on, they were basically set. So they used all the same starters all the way through the exhibition games. I think they're pretty much set in their rotation. And so if you have a loss in which you're trying to figure out how your players fit best together, I think that's okay. And, Pop being the smart coach that he is, I think he's going to be better prepared. He's going to now know, hey, here's who my best starters are, here's who my closers are, and here's who plays well in the second or the third quarters. And so I'm not too worried, especially having a genius there, a basketball genius like Popovich at the
So you basically see like Pop basically utilizing kind of like a playoff rotation, like try and get as much Donovan, Spider Mitchell, Tatum in there as he can, and then kind of try and figure everyone else as they go.
Yeah, I think so. And he's smart enough to now make different adjustments and realize, okay, here's, the lineup that we had that lost the last time or whatever it was that blew that 10-point lead. Maybe it was, poor defense that we had in that moment. Okay, I'm not going to play these poor defensive guys together. I need to have at least one good or two good, really good lockdown defenders on the court at all times or whatever it is. But I'm sure he'll make good adjustments.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they're favorites, but they've definitely lost a little bit of street cred going into the tournament.